Mm-hmm. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everybody. I'm Preacher Moss, host of the SOS, the Shout Out Show. I hope you're having a fabulous Wednesday. You made it to the middle of the week. It's downhill from there. Few things I want to say before I get off the muscle. There is a documentary on one of my mentors, Mr. Dick Gregory, Mr. Gregory, as I call him. It's called The One and Only Dick Gregory. I would implore everybody to watch one of our true comedic legends, comedic heroes, a civil rights advocate. They don't make them like they don't make him like these. He's the last of a position of a character, brothers and sisters, larger than life. Dick Gregory gave me the courage to not just do Allah made me funny, but he gave me the courage to choose a side, what side I was going to be on. And I got to talk to him about that, and he encouraged me to be on the Muslim side, be on the side of the other believers. He's like, forget all that stuff, immigrant Muslim, African American Muslims. He said, man, you got to be on the side of your people. Are they your people? And I said, yes, they are. He said, are you on the side of black people? I said, yes, you are. He said, on the side of the human beings? I said, yes, you are. And that instilled in me a lot of what I go through now. But watch that documentary because, like I said, he really, really put it in my spirit that at some point in time you got to choose. You got to be on the side. And you have to have the courage and conviction to do so. He actually inspired our topic today. This is actually a conversation we had a while ago talking about the mobility of African Americans. This conversation happened um, 2012, 2013 while we were working together. But our topic today, brothers, this is a throwback Thursday. And sometimes we think about music and we think about fashion and we think about trends, we think about sports. You know, it hit me today while I was at rehab, physical therapy. I said, one of the throwback topics that I have never talked about is the aspect of home ownership. Now, we talk about a home, house is not a home, da da da. But have we really, really discussed the imperative, the I want to say the moral fortitude of having a home and what that meant? And as I would also encourage you to check out Ibrahim Kendi, who has a new podcast called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And they talked about this whole aspect of home ownership. And it really resonated with me because a lot of times when you have ideas, you feel sometimes lonely in your ideas. Like you'll come up with an idea, a theory, and you'll connect the dots, but it's just your theory. And sometimes you feel like this is just, the way I think. And it's nice to be able to listen to a podcast and feel like other people think the way you think or share some of your views. And as well, they've done the research. You're a bit of a amateur sleuth, if you will, putting ideas together. I'm not a scholar, I'm not a PhD, but you can pull things together and develop a mosaic, a picture of everything that everybody can take a look at. And I had this, and I was saying to Sister Tana about the aspect of the home. We've talked a lot about loss of life. We've talked about stimulus packages. We've talked about um, insurrection. We've talked about a lot of things, but today's throwback topic is home ownership. Why home ownership was so important and why it's important now. It's important now to talk about home ownership because you're in a space right now where people can't buy homes and people are losing their homes. The people who are buying homes are buying homes. They're paying over the ask, the actual ask, and if they're doing cash, all cash options in a lot of cases. And the reason they could do that is because they know that it locks people out of the housing market. So per se, if you have to get financed, you're not attractive to that home seller. If you get financed, you're not particularly attractive to the real estate person because they know when you put in your bid, it's going to be contingent on financing. And they would rather have a client that has all the money, all cash, because that means that cycle keeps going and the real estate person gets their commission and things like that. But going deeper, I realized how important the idea of home ownership was to the African American community. I'm going to delve into that. I hope you stick with me on this because it's a very, very important topic. Because now the idea of home ownership is not applicable just to the African American. We have people who are losing their homes in mass. And if you really, really want to look at the record, you want to check the files, as we say, check the tape. A lot of the people losing homes right now are not black. We'll be right back with the start of the show. This is Preacher Monster SOS. Let's get it rolling. All right, everybody, we're back. I hope you're ready for a good show. I want to give a shout out to one of my mentors over here, my main man over here, over here. I'm going to do this show inspired by, of course, the great Duke Ellington, who represented a period of elegance and renaissance that's going to tie into a little bit of what I'm talking about. So, a big shout out to Duke Ellington. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to anybody who's coming on the show for the first time. You know what? Park yourself, sit in your sofa, get your popcorn, put on your slippers, relax for the next half hour because you're going to be a part of a particular community experience that's called the Shout Out Show. This community experience is not me being the host talking, but it is us having a conversation about some of the things that are around us, some of the things that we're thinking about, and also some of the things that we're not thinking about. I want to be very meticulous in letting you know that you are invited whenever you want to come to the Shout Out Show. This is your platform as well. The only thing we say is if you have a comment, let's keep it classy. And the only bad comment is a comment that you don't make. If you have something to say, hop in the comment section and our Shout Out Show team will make sure you get your shout out and you are heard. That's the way the Shout Out Show works. The other way the Shout Out Show works is we have to respect the people who come on here every day to make the platform what it is. They're better known as the stars in the building. I'm going to bring them on right now. Let's get our stars in the building, the Shout Out Show family, Shout Out Show soldiers. All right, there we go. We got Sister Ree, who is no longer in Texas. Sister Ree has gone down to Miami. You went down at the worst time, but I'm glad that the storm has passed. God bless you, Sister Ree, and don't stay in any tall buildings. In fact, find a short building to stay in. In fact, just sleep on the beach. Be a bum. Do not go in any tall buildings where there are white people. Okay? That's my warning to you. Sister Reed, hope you have a good time down in Miami. Next up, we got Sister Ika coming all the way from Depok, Indonesia. Welcome back to the show, sister. We missed you the last couple of days. We hope everything is going well. Make sure that you're taking care of yourself. I've been looking at the reports. Indonesia has a major COVID outbreak going over there, brothers and sisters, and they don't necessarily have availability of vaccine. This is something we were talking about earlier. So make the dua for the people of Indonesia and Sister Ike and her family and other families in Indonesia that they're taken care of and they're guarded from this dreadful pandemic. The Delta variant is out there and the other variant is out there. So I'm worried for people out there, but you have my duas. Guaranteed you have my duas that Allah keep you safe and for the people who get sick, give you shifa. All right, next up. Wa alaikum assalam rahmatullahi barakatuh. My main man, all talk for she. What's going on, brother? Mr. 6 o'clock, straight up, straight down, never late, always great. Our Canadian ambassador to the show. We appreciate you coming on the show. This man is quality control on this side of the border and the Canadian side of the border. And if I haven't said I appreciate you, brother, you lying because I always say I appreciate you. No, man, thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate your contributions. And let us know what you think about this topic today. I'll talk about home ownership. All right. Next up. Wa alaikum assalam rahmatullahi barakatuh, little brother. This is my little brother, Johnny L. Thomas. To me, he's known as JT. JT could probably tell you something about this because JT was homeowner, landlord, things like that. And today we're going to be talking about home ownership, but I'm going to take it beyond myself and move back to what it used to be. Back to what it used to be, back to when it was really a symbol of mobility, if you will, a symbol of mobility. And I'm going to talk about that. JT, thank you so much for joining the show, little brother. Hope you can contribute if you don't mind. Next up, oh, Ree is laughing. All right, Ree, enjoy Miami. Enjoy Miami. All right, Shaquan, thank you so much, Sister Ika. That's right. We all wish you well out there. And then we have, of course, our consultant producer. It doesn't happen without this lady, brothers and sisters. She's always in the back. We got to get her in the front. We are fast working on getting her to the front. But this show doesn't happen without my consultant producer. Of course, that's the lovely and talented Satana Whitfield, brothers and sisters. Always working the back, a soldier, if you will. So let's talk about this. Throwback Thursday. Today is about home ownership. Now, let me tell you one of the biggest joys of being a child. My parents and I lived out in Oxon Hill, Maryland, right across the street from Southeast Southern Avenue. We live in Oxon Hill, Maryland, on the Maryland side of Southern Avenue. And I can remember when my parents were looking for a house. Now, at this point in time, we lived in an apartment. It's like a third-story apartment. I can remember some of my friends, Jared Huggins, Ruth Huggins, Mr. Huggins. We had a whole lot of people. I always remember the Huggins because they were great people, good people. Miss Ruth Huggins was one of the sweetest people that you could ever meet, really. But I remember at a very young age, this is like 4 years old, that we started taking trips. Both of my parents were working. They worked civil service jobs. My dad worked for NIH and my mother worked for HEW, uh, Health Education and Welfare back in the day. My dad worked for National Institutes of Health. They were in a space where we lived in PG County, had one of the largest, if not the largest, black middle class suburb of Washington, D.C. That's what they celebrated back then. It was the largest black middle class suburb. And as my parents moved into a class, being middle class, if you will, one of the things that was very, very important to them is that they moved. They moved. They got out of the apartment and we moved to a house. And I can remember looking at a house at a place called Whitfield Chapel Road. We never took that house. We took a house in a place called Lanham, Maryland. And I remember the community because we had a black family across the street, the Browns. We had Miss Hall, black family had the Lowe's. There were a lot of teachers actually around that lived my neighborhood. The Browns were teachers, the Lowe's were teachers. Miss Hall was a teacher, and Mr. Hill was a teacher. Miss Alexander was a teacher, and Mr. Alexander taught music, and he was in the Army band. All of that is cool. But having a house, brothers and sisters, was a major accomplishment. It established an identity about you that not only said, I have mobility out of this situation where I am, but it also framed creditworthiness. It framed creditworthiness whereby you now have access to credit that a lot of people did not have access to credit to, meaning that you could go to legitimate banks and get a mortgage. Now, a lot of people don't understand this. It was extremely hard for my grandparents to get a mortgage, for your grandparents to get a mortgage. Because let's be honest, white banks did not loan to black people. Didn't matter if he had money or not, they didn't loan to. And my father got his, we got our house because my father was a veteran, so he had a VA loan. That being said, brothers and sisters, the idea of owning a home is a powerful, it's a powerful notion. And let me tell you why it's a powerful notion. Imagine someone says you're free. You can leave the plantation fields down south. But where do you go? You don't own anything. Barely the clothes on your back. You don't have ownership of tools that can help you farm or anything like that. And a status back then, brothers and sisters. If you ever watch the old films like Roots and things like that, one of the biggest and the happiest situations, scenarios is what? When they all moved into a home. Even the film I'm not crazy about, American Gangster, when Frank Lucas bought all of his people from North Carolina, what's the first thing he did? He took them to a house. This is a house. You know, we have this nature, we have this narrative when a young man goes in professional sports, he goes from rags to riches. What's the first thing he wants to do? He wants to get his mother a house. Why? Because he wants to be the person that introduces his mother to another level of living, another level of mobility. Signing your name on a mortgage, of course, is going to take you 30 years, but it does create a new conversation for you. And for a number of years, home ownership was a big deal. One of the best things about growing up was the black people in my neighborhood owned those houses. A lot of the seniors are still there and they own their house. My mother owns her house. You know, my dad owns his house. And I'm saying this to bring something important to you. What I'm trying to say was it was extremely hard. It was extremely difficult. These people didn't come by these homes on their own. And I'm telling you now, home ownership is one of the best things you could do. You know, I know a lot of people, we talk about cryptocurrency and all of that, but a house, a physical structure, has a lot of significance. Now, why am I bringing that up? Because at the beginning of 2000, there was an effort led to deconstruct all of that. If I said it was racist, I'll be correct. It was the perversion of the home ownership dream that allowed a lot of people, or forced a lot of people into bankruptcy and losing their homes. For a long time, the banks were not allowed to get into real estate. You can go get a loan from a bank and they process your loan and you have to pay closing costs. You have to pay some money to get the loan processed, but that was it. Politicians maneuvered to be able to get into the real estate business. This just comes from, of course, deregulation. And in that deregulation, let's be very, very clear. They targeted the people who they thought they could exploit the most. And that was African Americans, Native Americans, Latinos. They targeted the poor and they perverted their dream. And the way they did it was they told them you can have all the house you want to. Don't worry about it. And they gave them loans that they couldn't pay. Now, initially, brothers and sisters, I was very hard about this. Like, you know your finances. If you can't or if you can't buy that amount of house, don't buy that amount of house. You know, if you want a 3,000, 4,000 square foot house, you know what your finance. No. I was wrong to say that. Because here I am talking about how big a dream it is, and somebody offers you an opportunity to do that, to have it. It's not that those people that took on these loans, it's not that the people who took on these loans didn't work hard, didn't try to keep the house. They probably worked themselves into a tizzy and early grave trying to hold on to a house. It's just that the idea of owning a home was so powerful and seductive, they couldn't help themselves. And in that space of knowing they couldn't help themselves, here lies the rub. The practices of racism in finance comes because before this whole idea of banks getting into the real estate system, in the real estate business, it was hard to get a home loan. It was extremely difficult. And when the bank said, hey, listen, we're going to write it off, who cares if they pay the house off or not? We're going to get them in this thing called subprime loans. Subprime loans stands as one of the biggest, hear me, one of the biggest continuing threats, even though it's not here anymore, to people owning homes for the first time, to people being able to move their families not just out of a particular neighborhood, but move them to good schools. And I can give you everything about the racial breakdown and the data. But I remember when I was in a process, and they had this thing called no doc loans, which means you didn't have to show your finances. No doc loans is, just show a couple pay stubs, da da da, but you're not showing all the amount of doc. Because I remember when my parents were trying to get their house, you putting bids on house and things like that. And it was a lot simpler then. And you didn't have the internet and stuff like that. You physically had to go take a look at a house and meet a real estate agent. But my point is the process was a lot more tedious. And in it being tedious, it protected the buyer and the seller. Hear me now. It protected the buyer and the seller. And in 2000, we had this whole thing that literally destroyed home ownership. Not just for the people in 2000, but it would come back to bite us in the neck, of course, in 2000, 2007, 2008 with the housing crash. And that bigger bite was not just African Americans. That was the bigger bite of everybody outside of being African American, having to bear witness that a crime had been committed. And the question is, what's left? Literally, what's left? I said one of the biggest things is a blessing for home ownership. Well, one of the sadder things is sometimes home ownership could wind up that you're going to spend your life working for the house. Despite refinancing and all these things, there still lies a space where people have not taken responsibility. The American dream was a part of home ownership. The whole idea of a white picket fence and things like that, that white picket fence was in front of a house. I can't tell you what my grandparents paid for their house, but it was a row house. It was a row house. And it was on a whole block of row houses. It would go all the way down the street, alley here, and then the rest row houses. Those same row houses, brothers and sisters, that may have cost $15,000 back in the day, are now going for almost $600,000. Doesn't matter if they're fixed up. Doesn't matter if they're rat infested. Doesn't matter if the ceiling is falling in. Doesn't matter if it's got a bad roof. It's going for almost $600,000. And what that creates is a generational problem. Because some of the people who have passed those houses down to their children now in advanced age, they will lose those houses, those $600,000 houses, unless they sell them, because they won't be able to pay the property taxes. One of the biggest crimes, one of the biggest Ponzi schemes that was out there, and I hold the bank responsible, I hold the politicians responsible. It was the whole concept of CDOs. CDOs were called collateral debt obligations. Now, for the life of myself and a whole lot of other people, nobody's been able to figure out the algorithm of a CDO. Money comes in, money goes out. Because it's not really an algorithm, it's a Ponzi scheme. That you'll be able to package a loan, ship it off, and then someone else will pick it up, and then someone else will pick it up, and it's not your problem anymore. But what are the dream of home ownership? What about the term settling down instead of just settling? What of the term of long-term stability, community building? I think one of the most depressing things I've seen is to be in a space, brothers and sisters, to be in a house. In my grandmother, there's a part across the street, my grandmother's house. And this is sad because I can remember the people who own the houses. The Gibson family were there almost 60 years. Across the street on 7th Street, the Gibson family stayed in this house for a number of years. Now, the house was run down, but somebody bought that house. They bought the Gibson family house and they gutted it. And I went on the internet and I looked at the Gibson family house and it looked beautiful, brothers and sisters. They did all kind of remodeling. Looked beautiful. And they sold that house for almost $800,000. And I immediately got to worrying about the rest of the people in the neighborhood because that $800,000 drives up everybody else's property tax. And so it becomes so much less about home ownership or homeowners. You see, because when people back in the day would buy a house, and I'm gonna use my grandparents' house. That house had one, two, three rooms. They were all upstairs. At one point in time, that house had my father, my Aunt Ruth, my Aunt Dottie, my Uncle Reggie, my Aunt May, her husband Frank, two of her kids, or three of her kids, Kenny, Don, and Kenny, Don, and Frank. And then it had my Aunt Dut with her husband, Uncle Charles, and their two daughters, Ann and Lynn. It was only three bedrooms. And I can tell you this, my granddad slept in his own bedroom. You ain't sleep with him. But my point is, they all stayed in that house until when? Until they found the legs to get their own house. Do you see where I'm going with this? I'm talking about a legacy that's tied into African American freedom of expression financially. The house was the big thing. If you didn't have anything, you had your house. And the house stood for a lot of things, brothers and sisters. Today, the housing market does not cater to families. It caters to people who can pay for the house. It doesn't cater to community building. We want to be in a space where it's a good school. They want to be in a space where it's a good community, where you know your neighbors per se. And this is not an indictment for people buying houses. It's an indictment for the mortgage company. It's an indictment for all the politicians that made sure that these people would not be able to buy houses. There are people, good, hardworking people, in living in tough areas that wish they could move out, that will work extremely hard to come up with down payments, 20%, all of that, only to get to the negotiating table, plop their money down, and then people will move their money back to them. Here's my money. They take the money because it's all set up for a person who has all cash, 30 days closed, no contingency. And these people get knocked out of the market. I say this because on the flip side of it, staying where they are at some point in time with gentrification ultimately move them out as well. So here you are between a rock and a hard place, or rock and soon to be no place. If you drive around the city these days, the urban areas, I was joking with a friend of mine about doing a video shoot in Southeast DC, and I said I want to meet in the old DC. He laughed and he said there is no old DC, because when you go to Southeast DC these days or Northwest DC, it's very gentrified. And so you begin to wonder, where are the people going? Where are the people going? The folks who used to own these houses are no longer there. And we're not just talking about ownership, we're talking about legacy, we're talking about history. We're talking about people who came and established something. Not people that came and bought into a culture, they established a culture. And slowly and slowly and slowly, it's moving away. I have pictures, I couldn't find them, but I have pictures actually of the house we didn't move into on Whitfield Chapel Road. But I thought we were going to move into that house. And I was all of 4 years old. But what I liked is that I had a basement. We had a backyard. This sounds horrible. We had grass that didn't have litter in it. We had a carport. And we had a window where you looked out and you could see other people who were able to look out at windows. Let me throw this up from Altaf. What you got from me? In Toronto, because of limited land space, we're seeing an increase in high rises. Families are forced to purchase those if they want to live in the city, and this in turn causes overcrowding in the schools. Classic example. Plus the fact you've got to be able to afford that house. So you have people buying. Well, in Toronto, I know for a fact a lot of people are buying houses that are, they're paying exorbitant prices for houses that aren't that big. So they're overpaying for prices. JT, housing prices in Milwaukee, Wisconsin have rocketed. The home you stayed in near Marquette prices have tripled. Yeah. JT knows exactly what I stayed in when I was in college, and I'm let us go. But when I was in college, I stayed on the place. It was on 21st Street off of a Highland and 21st. It was considered hood, but it was a hood spot, right? And I rented a room in there my senior year, and when I went back to teach, I rented a room there as well. Um, it was in the hood, man. And JT is right. That house right now is probably that house back then was probably worth maybe I don't know 40, $50,000. That house is probably worth $300,000 to $400,000. He's not lying. He's speaking the gospel truth. And I think about all the people who lived on that block because it was next to a church, the whole nine, and close to Marquette University. I think about all the people that lived on that block who weren't rich, who didn't own the houses they lived in. And I sit around going, where did they go? Like, where did they go? The Milwaukee is a strange place because a lot of time it's a people buy homes in Milwaukee, but a large percent of people rent. So it's a renter culture. People move from this apartment to that apartment to this apartment to that apartment. Some people just don't have the opportunity to make the jump to get a house, and I'm sure it happens. It happens other places, but I'm talking about people who are doing the rent dance, making the rent jump. This place, they're in their 40s and 50s, brothers and sisters. They're not necessarily locked in, settled in. They're not moving from house to house. They're moving from apartment to apartment. And what they found is they've had to deal with roadblocks. Getting, I purchased property. I'll be honest with you. I played the game. I was like, oh, they selling a house. All right, let me see what I can do. I have what's called comedian credit. And comedian credit is really, really funny because you are a sole proprietor or LLC, which is a pass through. Everybody knows that. But as a sole proprietor or LLC, we write down everything. And I remember doing my taxes, we write down everything. So you might have made X amount of money, you're going to write down as much as it. And in the end, it's like, how much money did you make? And according to the number that you have on your income taxes, people may think that you're living in a trash can beside a microwave. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm doing fine. I have a car, da da da. But the interesting thing is, people go, well, you can't afford a house, or you can't afford a refi. I'm like, of course I can. That's when they stick you. Nope, according to this thing. But I'm like, here's the game. Corporations do it, but I can't do it. Corporations tell you right that they don't even pay taxes. But I did my same thing the same way the corporation did, and you're telling me that I can't get a house, I can't get a refinance. It was interesting, folks, in the games that people play with that. So I want to close on a high note, though. My high note is that I hope that all the brothers and sisters out there who are watching this now, and the brothers and sisters who will watch it later, will have the opportunity, if you haven't had already, to get a home. And not just get a home as a generational statement for your kids and your family, to let them know that mobility is possible. And I want to see you in a space whereby your credit worthiness is not your credit worthiness; it's about your character, the ability to go out and get a home and make sacrifices for yourself and others to make sure that they have a higher and a sustained quality of life, standard of living. The home is nice, but it's the people who fill the homes that make the case, that make the home important. So I want to make sure, and my prayer for all of you is that, you know what, if you're in a home, despite everything that's going on, that you hold on to your house, whether it's how your first house or your second house, rental properties, hold on to it. Hold on to it. And when you make a move in regarding to your real estate or things like that, think about how blessed you are to be holding that entity, to be holding that asset. Think about the people who came out of the cotton fields that had nothing, but they had an idea. And the idea is that a house could be a home, and a home can be an asset. And they pass that along to us. I'm Preacher Moss. Let's go and get to our sponsors, brothers and sisters. I want to give a shout out to BeFinancialIndependent.com. Again, that's BeFinancialIndependent.com. Call 1-888-496-6845. Again, that's 1-888-496-6845. Make sure you call today. Also, want to give a shout out to Bayan Islamic Graduate School. Again, that's Bayan Islamic Graduate School. If you think about getting a quality graduate level education, whether it's a master's or a doctoral or even a certificate program, they have for pastoral studies, make sure you check them out. And if you don't want to just check them out for that, listen, go to the website, look at some of the incredible scholars that they've brought in as instructors or visiting professors, and get some free information. All right. That's my show for today. Remember, brothers and sisters, a house is not just a home, it's a statement. I'm Preacher Moss. This is a shout out show. Inshallah, I'll see you tomorrow. Yo, assalamu alaikum. I'm Preacher Moss, comedian extraordinaire, but I like to add a new title to my name. I'm Professor Preacher Moss. You know why? Because I just graduated. Wait a minute, let me get this out of here. This is it. Okay. I'm Professor Preacher Moss, and it's come through the courtesy and the blessing of the Muhammad Ali Scholarship, which came through Bayan Islamic Graduate School. Now, listen, I know a lot of you people are thinking, can I do it? Yes, you can do it. This is the part where I know I'm supposed to say it's easy. It's not easy. Listen, it was easier to get this degree. Trump would be a mufti. I digress. Listen, though, for you brothers and sisters that are interested, go to bayanonline.org, and you could be like me. Put yourself in the picture for Islamic education. Wait a minute, there's a picture right there. Sound like them, everybody. Take care. Preach them off.